The chamber was alive with restless energy, the kind of crackling tension that makes the air feel electric. Journalists leaned forward, cameras hummed with their unblinking gaze, and whispers rippled like waves across the crowd. Then without warning, Rachel Maddow's voice shattered the low murmur. It wasn't the steady, analytical tone millions knew from their living rooms. It was a raw, furious scream, a cry so sharp it cut through the hall and made heads snap in unison. Scream wasn't just loud. It carried years of frustration, disbelief, and urgency compressed into one uncontainable moment. For a beat, it felt like America itself held its breath. Across the room, Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. If anything, the corner of her mouth curved upward into the faintest defiant smile. Dodd's fury may have rattled the chamber, but Crockett had come armed with words sharper than steel. The Congresswoman leaned forward, eyes flashing with resolve, and unleashed a retort that cut like a knife through the stunned silence. Her voice didn't need to rise. It struck with precision. Every syllable landed like a gavel, echoing with authority and conviction. The crowd gasped, half in shock, half in utter audacity. For a fleeting second, the balance of power shifted. Maddow, red with righteous indignation, faced a woman who seemed utterly unshaken, unwilling to bow to the pressure of television's most unflinching interrogator. Crockett's words danced with fire, painting Maddow not as a force of reason, but as a voice cracking under the weight of her own disbelief. It was more than a rebuttal. It was a declaration that she would not be silenced, not even by the fiercest of critics. The room buzzed with reactions. Pens scrawled across notepads. Reporters whispered furiously, their phones vibrating with editors, demanding instant updates. The cameras zoomed in closer, hungry to capture every flicker of expression. Every twitch of Maddow's lips, every glimmer of defiance in Crockett's eyes. What the audience witnessed wasn't just a debate, it was a collision of personalities. Pride and principle unfolding in real time, more gripping than any scripted drama. Viewers at home leaned in, sensing they were watching the spark of something that would spread far beyond this chamber. And as Maddow's breath quickened, preparing for her next strike, one truth became clear. This confrontation had only just begun. But Maddow had no idea this was only the beginning. Rachel Maddow's scream wasn't just a burst of anger, it was a signal flare. For years, she had stood as one of the sharpest voices in American media, dissecting corruption, calling out hypocrisy, and holding power to account. Her fury in that chamber symbolized something larger than her own frustration. It was the establishment itself, recoiling at a challenger who refused to play by the old rules. Maddow carried the weight of legacy journalism, the voice of institutions that once controlled the narrative. When she raised her voice, it wasn't only Rachel Maddow. Speaking it was the echo of an entire system that demanded order, demanded respect, demanded compliance. But Jasmine Crockett was not born from that system, nor was she shaped by its rules. Her rise had come from community grit, from standing in rooms where the voices of the unheard carried more truth than polished anchors ever could. Her fire was not rehearsed for ratings. It was lived experience sharpened into defiance. To her, Maddow's scream was not the voice of righteous outrage. It was the sound of a gatekeeper unwilling to open the gates. And when Crockett answered back, she wasn't just clapping back at a journalist. She was speaking for every outsider, every immigrant, every identity that had been told to sit quietly while the establishment talked over them. This was the clash of two Americas. On one side, the polished authority of media powerhouses who had built careers on commanding the stage. On the other, the raw, unapologetic energy of a new generation of political voices who refused to bow, who treated dignity not as decorum, but as defiance. Maddow screamed to enforce control. Crockett replied to shatter the illusion that control still belonged to the old guard. Why did it matter? Because the stakes weren't just reputations, they were values. It was American power, defined by those who held the microphone longest or by those who fought to seize it against the odds. Was truth something carefully managed and broadcast? Or was it something messy, emotional, and lived by those who had endured it firsthand? The confrontation became a mirror for the nation. To some, Maddow represented stability, a trusted voice, holding chaos at bay, as two others. She embodied the arrogance of a system unwilling to make space for voices it couldn't control. Crockett's rebuttal, meanwhile, electrified a base that longed to see boldness. Authenticity and identity pride unapologetically thrown into the spotlight. The whispers in the chamber, the flashes of cameras, the swelling chatter online, every moment amplified the symbolism. It was more than two women raising their voices. It was a duel over who would define truth in an America that was tired of noise yet hungry for real-else. And while Maddow might have assumed her scream would end the exchange, Crockett's calm yet fiery clapback revealed something undeniable. This wasn't a one-off. This was a spark that would ignite a larger battle. It's one where volume alone could never guarantee victory. But the deeper clash wasn't about volume. It was about who truly defined power in America. Rachel Maddow didn't arrive in that chamber as a neutral observer. She walked in with years of baggage of battles waged on air, feuds amplified online, of moments where her voice wasn't just analysis but domination. For millions, she had long been the queen of progressive outrage, sharp-tongued and relentless, dissecting political opponents with precision. But in her climb to the top, another side of Maddow emerged, an ego that sometimes blurred the line. Between righteous fury and unchecked arrogance, the record is littered with examples. Clips have surfaced across social media, old debates where Maddow's voice cracked with fury as she drowned out guests mid-sentence. Memes circulate of her infamous eye roll at a young activist who dared to challenge her framing. Users spliced together moments of Maddow, cutting off voices of color, packaging them with captions like, "This is what establishment allyship looks like." Each clip might have been small in isolation, but together they painted a picture not of the fearless truth-teller Maddow saw in herself, but of a figure increasingly obsessed with control. Twitter threads remind viewers of the 2019 clash, when Maddow dismissed a grassroots immigrant rights organizer on her show. The organizer, nervous but determined, attempted to highlight border abuses. Instead of amplifying the story, Maddow pivoted sharply, accusing them of oversimplifying complex issues. The clip went viral not for Maddow's intellect, but for the cold way she brushed aside lived experience in favor of her polished narrative. The hashtag #MADDOW dismisses trended for days, exposing cracks in her reputation as a champion of the marginalized. Her critics call it a pattern, Maddow lifting up voices only when they echoed her analysis, silencing them when they strayed. On YouTube, compilations rack up views under titles like Rachel Maddow's Most Savage Shutdowns. The thumbnails show her grinning in triumph, while opponents look small and silenced. To some, it's entertainment. To others, it's evidence of a deeper arrogance and inability to share the stage without smothering it. Even allies have raised eyebrows. Behind closed doors, whispers from colleagues describe her as fiercely intelligent, but increasingly intolerant of being challenged. Rachel doesn't debate, one anonymous insider quipped in a leaked article. She conquers. That conquers. Mentality became part of her brand, fueling her nightly dominance on air. But it also sowed the seeds of her vulnerability. For when authority becomes ego, and ego becomes spectacle, the audience begins to question whether they are watching truth or just theater, and theater it was. Maddow understood better than anyone the power of drama. Her pauses, her smirks, her sharp intakes of breath, they were all part of the performance. But performances come with risks. The very style that made her compelling could just as easily make her appear condescending. When clips were stripped of their context and spread across TikTok and X, viewers didn't see a brilliant analyst. They saw a woman reveling in her ability to dominate, even humiliate, anyone who dared cross her path. It's not that Maddow lacked substance. Her research was legendary, her monologues often meticulous. But substance alone wasn't what made her a household name. It was the spectacle of watching her crush opponents, cut off challengers, and enforce her authority with theatrical precision. And spectacle has a way of backfiring when the audience starts rooting for the underdog. So when she screamed in that chamber, it wasn't heard in isolation. It echoed against years of similar moments, years where Maddow's voice filled the space, leaving no oxygen for those who challenged her. Social media didn't treat it as a shocking departure. They treated it as the climax of a pattern. Another entry in the reel of Rachel Maddow's unchecked arrogance. One viral TikTok laid it out bluntly. Rachel Maddow's scream wasn't new, it was inevitable. The video stitched together. Clips of her past outbursts, captions flashing the words, dominate, dismiss, destroy. The message landed. This wasn't just about a single confrontation with Jasmine Crockett. It was about a legacy of control finally colliding with resistance. She had spent years sharpening her voice into a weapon. Now that weapon was beginning to turn against her. But arrogance always has a way of meeting its match. Jasmine Crockett's story doesn't begin under the bright lights of a congressional chamber, nor in the fiery glare of cable news cameras. It begins in the quieter places, the neighborhoods where survival was an everyday struggle, where dignity had to be fought for piece by piece, where voices like hers were often dismissed. Before they ever reached a microphone, Crockett's identity wasn't polished in think tanks or curated in elite universities. It was forged in the raw fire of lived experience, in the push and pull of a country that has always promised equality but so often delivered barriers. Her roots stretch deep into the story of America itself, the story of families who came here seeking opportunity, who worked jobs nobody else wanted, who endured humiliation but refused to surrender their pride. Crockett grew up hearing those stories told across kitchen tables, stories about resilience, about the cost of dignity, about what it meant to carve out a place in a nation that seemed to forget the very people who built it. Those stories weren't just history lessons, they were a calling. By the time she was old enough to understand injustice, Crockett had already experienced it. Teachers who underestimated her, officials who dismissed her, neighborhood leaders who warned her that fighting for change meant walking into a storm of resistance. But the more people told her know your place, the more determined she became to redefine what that place could be. She wasn't interested in fitting neatly into a mold crafted by others. She was interested in smashing it all together. Her journey through law school was less about prestige and more about purpose. While others were chasing clerkships and ivory towers, Crockett was walking into courtrooms stacked against the powerless. She became the lawyer who took the cases nobody else wanted, the mother facing eviction, the worker cheated of wages, the immigrant terrified of deportation. She didn't just see clients. She saw reflections of her own family, of her own community, of every story told around that kitchen table, and in those cases, she found her voice.
Ow.
It was sharp. It was unapologetic.
Ow.
And above all, it was hers. That voice carried her into politics. Though it was never an easy road, Crockett wasn't backed by wealthy donors or corporate lobbies. She was carried by grassroots energy, by volunteers knocking on doors, by people who had long been told they didn't matter, but saw in her a mirror of themselves. Campaign speeches weren't rehearsed performances, they were raw and real, punctuated by emotion and by truth. She didn't speak in polished sound bites. She spoke in lived experience, and that made her dangerous to the establishment. Critics painted her as too loud, too emotional, too defiant. But for every pundit who tried to diminish her, there were thousands of young people, immigrants, working families who saw her strength as validation. She sounds like us, they said. She fights like us, and that was the difference. Crockett didn't ascend by trying to become part of the system. She ascended by showing people that they could confront it. Every viral moment, every fiery floor speech, every unapologetic clapback carried a deeper weight. For her, speaking truth wasn't about theatrics, it was about survival. And survival had always been the core of her story. She knew the stakes of silence. She had lived them. She knew that to remain quiet in the face of arrogance was to erase not just herself, but everyone she represented. And that's why Crockett resonated. She wasn't simply a politician. She was the embodiment of a broader struggle. To be seen, to be heard. To be valued in a system that too often rewards those who shout the loudest while ignoring those who carry the deepest truths. She wore that responsibility not as a burden, but as armor. Every insult hurled her way became fuel. Every dismissal became proof of why she had to keep pushing. It's why. When Maddow's scream cut through that chamber, Crockett didn't flinch. She had heard worse. She had lived worse. She had grown up with the sound of doors slammed in her face, with authority figures barking commands, with a system that told her she was too much, too different, too unpolished to belong. Maddow's scream wasn't just a moment of outrage, it was an echo of every barrier Crockett had already broken through. And that's where the power shifted. Because Crockett wasn't standing there as just a congresswoman. She was standing there as the daughter of resilience, as the lawyer who had defended the powerless, as the woman who had carried the voices of her community into halls that had never made space for them. Her very presence was defiance. Composure was revolution. For millions watching at home, this wasn't just political theater. It was deeply personal. It was about identity, about pride, about the vindication of finally seeing someone who looked like them, who spoke like them, who carried their frustrations and their dreams, holding her ground against a voice that had too often spoken over them. The beauty of Crockett's story isn't that she rose without obstacles. It's that every obstacle became proof of her strength. And now, standing in that chamber with Maddow's voice booming, she was more than a politician, more than a disruptor. She was a symbol. A reminder that dignity doesn't come from being granted permission. It comes from seizing space and refusing to give it back. And when the moment came, Crockett was more than ready to strike back. The chamber was no longer a chamber. It was an arena. The air itself seemed to vibrate with the sound of Rachel Maddow's rising voice, her tone sharp enough to cut through the steady hum of cameras, reporters, and whispers in the gallery. She leaned forward, her finger pointed like a spear, determined to overwhelm with sheer volume, answer the question. Maddow thundered, her words echoing like a command. Every syllable was loaded with force, as though the act of shouting could substitute for the weight of truth. But Crockett didn't budge, her shoulders squared, her eyes steady, her voice sharpened to precision. She fired back with surgical words, each one landing like a jab, quick and measured. "You don't get to define me with your noise," she shot back, her tone calm but charged. The contrast was electric Maddow with fury spilling over, Crockett with calm precision that only made Maddow's intensity look more desperate. Around them, the room seemed to lean forward, the gallery filled with murmurs, gasps, even faint chuckles, as the clash grew more theatrical by the second. Maddow slammed another point, her voice rising higher, her rhetoric fast and relentless. She was trying to corner Crockett, to drown her in a flood of accusations and interruptions. "This is about credibility. This is about accountability," Maddow barked, cutting off Crockett mid-sentence. But Crockett stood her ground, her retorts sharper now, carrying not just facts but fire. "No, this is about respect. Respect for truth, respect for dignity, and respect for every voice you can silence." The words hit like a hook across the jawline of Maddow's argument. The crowd reacted instantly, half gasping, half applauding under their breath. Even the cameras seemed to zoom in tighter, hungry to capture every twitch of Maddow's expression, every flicker of Crockett's composure. Maddow pushed harder, trying to break the rhythm. "You're dodging," but Crockett cut her off clean, her voice steady as steel. "I'm standing, and there's a difference." That line landed like a bell in the boxing ring. The crowd erupted in murmurs. Reporters' pens scratched furiously, and social media feeds lit up in real time. Maddow's face tightened, her volume escalating again, her words tumbling over themselves in an effort to reassert dominance. The dynamic had become unmistakable. Maddow swung wildly with noise and fury, while Crockett countered with sharp precision. Each response timed like a perfectly placed punch. It was no longer about the issue at hand. It was about the spectacle, about who could hold the room, who could command the story. Gasps punctuated the air with each exchange. At one point, an audible "oh" rippled through the gallery as Crockett landed another verbal strike, her visual delivery measured, her tone refusing to rise to Maddow's frequency. The tension was so thick it felt like the entire room was holding its breath. Every interruption, every raised hand from Maddow only made Crockett's resolve more visible. She wasn't rattled, she was focused. Her calm in the storm became its own kind of power, making Maddow's outbursts look less like authority and more like desperation. The rhythm quickened, like a final round, each second heavier than the last. Maddow leaned in again, her voice near shouting, her face red with intensity. She demanded control. She demanded the spotlight and Crockett. She gave a small, almost imperceptible smile before delivering a line so sharp it sliced through the noise like a blade. Her words weren't shouted, they didn't need to be. They carried weight not because of volume, but because of truth. The chamber went silent for a split. Second silent in that way only true shocks can silence a room. Even Maddow paused, mid-motion, as though struck by the force of composure itself. It was clear now, this wasn't just a debate. It was a duel of styles, of identities, of what power really looked like. And for the first time, the balance seemed to shift. But then the exchange flipped the entire room upside down. The silence that followed Maddow's last outburst wasn't just silence. It was suspension. It's a kind of silence that hovers like static before a thunderclap. The audience leaned in, phones raised, eyes wide, breaths held. For a moment, even Maddow herself seemed to realize that her volume had nowhere else to go. She'd climbed as high as shouting could take her, and all that remained was the dizzying drop that comes after. Crockett let the silence stretch. She didn't rush, she didn't flinch. She let the weight of Maddow's tirade hang in the air until it collapsed under its own heaviness. Then, with a calmness that felt almost surgical, she leaned slightly forward. Her voice, quiet but firm, cut through the stillness like a scalpel. "You think the loudest person in the room is the strongest," she began, her tone steady, deliberate. "But volume doesn't equal truth. Noise doesn't equal power. Shouting down voices like mine doesn't erase them, it only shows the fear behind the scream." The chamber reacted instantly. A ripple of gasps, murmurs, and stifled applause surged through the crowd. Maddow blinked, caught off guard, as though the ground had just shifted beneath her feet. She tried to interject, to seize the rhythm back, but Crockett held up a single hand not aggressively, but decisively. The room stilled again. "Rachel, you've built a career telling America what to think," Crockett continued, each word sharp with precision. "But America isn't buying it anymore, because America is more than your narrative. America's every immigrant mother who worked 2 jobs so her child could sit here today. America is every voter who's been told to wait their turn. America is every voice you've dismissed as too radical, too messy, too inconvenient." Her voice rose not in pitch, but in resonance, carrying weight instead of heat. Cameras zoomed in, capturing Maddow's tightening jaw, her visible struggle to reclaim control. "And you know what's really inconvenient?" Crockett paused, letting the silence build again, the audience leaning forward like spectators before the final blow. "That the very people you try to shout over, the ones you dismiss, the ones you laugh at, are the same people who will outlast you, because truth doesn't need to scream. It just needs to stand." The room erupted. A mix of gasps, applause, and stunned silence washed over the chamber. Even reporters, usually restrained, exchanged wide-eyed looks as they scribbled furiously in their notebooks. Maddow's face flushed with visible frustration. She opened her mouth, but no words came. For once, the force of her personality couldn't outmatch the calm fire sitting across from her. Crockett leaned back slightly, allowing the reaction to swell. Her composure was magnetic, her tone unwavering. She wasn't just responding, she was reframing the entire narrative. Maddow had wanted a spectacle, a shouting match to showcase dominance. But Crockett had turned it into something else, a masterclass. In control, a mic drop that needed no literal mic to echo. "You shout because you're afraid of being forgotten," Crockett said finally, her words slower now, more deliberate. "But we don't need to shout because history is already on our side. Dignity lasts longer than arrogance. Service lasts longer than ego. And justice is louder than any scream." That last line landed with the weight of a gavel. Stunned hush fell across the chamber before the audience broke into audible gasps, then applause that grew unstoppable. Maddow's hands clenched. On the table, her frustration written in every twitch of her expression. She had entered the exchange with fire, but now stood surrounded by the smoke of her own collapse. The camera flashes captured it all. Maddow's faltering composure, unshaken poise, the crowd's electric reaction. And in that moment, it was clear the balance of power had shifted, not through shouting, but through clarity, dignity, and precision. Maddow tried once more, a final attempt to reassert herself. "That's not," but Crockett cut in smoothly, her voice carrying like the final word in a courtroom drama. "That's exactly what this is, and America is watching." A thunderclap of applause followed, louder than anything Maddow's voice could muster. Wasn't just a response, it was validation, a symbolic verdict rendered right there in the chamber. Maddow, for once, had no follow-up, no comeback, no refuge in volume. The viral moment had just been born. You could feel it in the room, the collective awareness that history wasn't only being debated, it was being recorded, clipped, shared, and immortalized. And sure enough, as the applause rolled and the cameras zoomed closer on Crockett's composed expression, the first phone screens lit up in the gallery. Tweets were already flying. TikToks were being drafted mid-clash. Clips were cutting, captions being written. Crockett destroys Maddow on live TV. Maddow slumped slightly, the energy drained from her attempt to dominate. Crockett, meanwhile, sat tall, unbothered, her face serene but resolute. She had flipped the narrative, transformed noise into humiliation, and carved out a moment that would echo far beyond the chamber walls. And within minutes, the internet caught fire. Phones lit up before the applause even died down. By the time Crockett leaned back in her chair, the first clips had already escaped the chamber and begun their viral march across the internet. On X, hashtags ignited like wildfire. Hashtag Crockett clapback. Hashtag MADDOW meltdown. Hashtag dignity wins. Within minutes, they trended not just nationally, but globally. Screens everywhere replayed the moment, the calm precision of Crockett's words, the visible unraveling of Maddow's composure. TikTok was first to weaponize the clip into culture. Edits flew out by the second. One slowed Crockett's mic drop to half speed with thunder sound effects. Another looped Maddow's faltering expression to a laugh track. Side-by-side remixes showed Crockett's takedown against cinematic scores Hans Zimmer strings swelling as she delivered her final line. Justice is louder than any scream. Teens, activists, and casual viewers alike stitched the video into their own messages. This is how you handle arrogance. This is what strength. It looks like YouTube followed, with commentary channels rushing to upload breakdowns. Crockett ends Maddow's career in 3 minutes. Why everyone is talking about this viral exchange. Political pundits, entertainers, even lifestyle vloggers chimed in, using the clash as shorthand for resilience in the face of bullying. The thumbnails alone were viral fuel. Maddow, mid-shout, Crockett cool and composed. Split-screened like a movie poster. And the memes. Twitter users pasted Crockett's quotes over Marvel-style posters. Truth doesn't need to scream. Instagram turned Maddow's face into a template for over-the-top rage reactions. Reddit compiled top 10 Maddow cell phones within the hour. Even on Facebook, where politics usually drags, parents and grandparents were reposting the video with captions like, "This young woman speaks for us all." But it wasn't just the internet's humor machine. It was political oxygen. Lawmakers weighed in. Progressive Congress members tweeted fiery support. This is what courage looks like. Activists across movements from immigrant rights to climate justice shared Crockett's words as a rallying cry. Even celebrities outside politics couldn't resist. An A-list actor posted, "Put this woman on every debate stage in America." A Grammy-winning musician clipped the moment into their concert backdrop the very next night, captioning it "dignity greater than arrogance." Meanwhile, Maddow faced the storm. She logged on to see her name dragged across platforms with merciless speed. Commentators dissected her every flinch, every glare. Headlines rolled in, Maddow outshouted by calm clapback, the moment that shook cable news. Even her allies struggled to defend the spectacle. One late-night host joked, "Turns out yelling isn't great when you lose to someone who whispers." The laughter drew applause, sealing Maddow's new role as the butt of the internet's running joke. The contrast couldn't have been sharper. For every mocking meme of Maddow, Crockett's image grew larger, prouder, almost iconic. She was painted as the calm firebrand. The woman who stood tall against establishment arrogance and didn't just survive, but redefined the exchange. Her words became more than a rebuttal. They became slogans, captions, rallying chants at marches and rallies days later. Homemade signs bore her phrases: "History is already on our side," "Dignity lasts longer than arrogance." Teachers printed them out for classrooms. College students screen printed them on t-shirts. On podcasts, her lines were quoted as if they belonged to the canon of great political retorts. And yet, beneath the laughter, beneath the viral edits and memes, something deeper stirred. This wasn't just about a scream, a clapback, or even a single debate night. It was about what the moment revealed about who gets to define power, whose voice carries weight, and what America truly values when arrogance collides with dignity. Because, while Maddow's meltdown gave the internet a feast of content, Crockett's clarity gave the people something else entirely: a mirror. A glimpse of themselves in her poise, her pride, her refusal to shrink. The internet may have caught fire in minutes, but the embers of this clash, what it meant, what it signaled, were only beginning to glow. But beyond the memes, the deeper meaning was just beginning to unfold. The noise faded, but the meaning only grew louder. What Crockett had shown wasn't just a clever retort or a viral victory. It was a lesson in power, where it comes from, who holds it, and how it endures. Power, she proved, doesn't belong to the one who shouts the loudest. It belongs to the one who stands their ground, rooted in truth and dignity, unshaken by arrogance. Her words reframed the clash. For too long, voices like Maddow's had been treated as the measure of authority, the establishment microphone, polished and amplified. But Crockett revealed something different: that authority without integrity is just noise, that real influence is earned, not demanded, that a scream, no matter how sharp, will always fade, while dignity echoes. This was more than a debate. It was a reflection of something millions felt in their own lives. For every immigrant family told to keep their heads down, for every young voice dismissed as too inexperienced, for every woman told her passion was too much, Crockett's composure was vindication. She showed that strength isn't about playing the game by their rules. It's about rewriting the rules. It's all together. Her story had already been built on resilience, but this moment gave it clarity. Crockett wasn't just speaking for herself. She was speaking for the countless who had ever been interrupted, dismissed, or underestimated. Her calmness in the face of fury wasn't passivity, it was power, distilled into its purest form. And in that power was something profoundly American. Not the America of headlines and talking points, but the America of struggle and perseverance. The America of immigrants who crossed oceans and deserts with nothing but hope. The America of workers who stood on picket lines demanding fairness. The America of students who marched, sang, and refused to be silent. That was the America Crockett tapped into, the one that remembers its promise when it is tested. By turning arrogance into its own undoing, Crockett reminded us that dignity is not weakness. Dignity is armor. Truth is weapon enough. And justice, when spoken with clarity, doesn't need to shout, as her moment ricocheted across the nation. It carried a quiet invitation to believe again in what America can be. To see strength not as domination, but as resilience. To understand that every person who refuses to bend under insult is already reshaping the country's future. The clash was unforgettable. Yes, but the moral was unforgettable too. America does not move forward when arrogance rules the stage. It moves forward when courage rises from unexpected places, when voices once ignored take the mic, and when truth stands taller than pride, and in that chamber, before millions of eyes, Crockett reminded us of something essential: that our identity, our struggles, and our voices are not just part of America's story, they are its beating heart. In moments like these, America remembers who we are, and so it comes full circle. What began with a scream meant to dominate ended with a clapback that reshaped the moment, the room, and the nation's conversation. Dodd's outburst may have rattled the air, but it was Crockett's composure, sharp, steady, and unshaken, that defined the legacy of that night. This wasn't just a clash of personalities. It was a living symbol of the values we hold dear. Dignity over arrogance, truth over noise, America over ego.
One side demanded attention.
The other side earned respect. and respect always outlasts rage. For millions watching, the message was unmistakable. Real power doesn't need to scream. It doesn't need to bully. Real power lives in the courage to stand firm, to speak with clarity, and to let justice carry the weight of your words. That is what Crockett gave us. That is what America, at its best, has always been about. But here's the truth. This is bigger than just one debate. It's about who we are and who we choose to be. Every time arrogance steps onto the stage, dignity must be ready to meet it. Every time noise drowns out reason, truth must rise above it. And every time ego tries to claim the spotlight, America must remember that the spotlight belongs to the people. If you believe that power should always answer to justice, if you believe that voices rooted in truth deserve to rise above the noise, then this is your moment too. Join us. Be part of Inside Power. Because together, we don't just watch history, we shape it. Subscribe now, and let's keep dignity louder than arrogance.